So I'd like to welcome everyone to our Signal360 Spotlight, and we're here today with author Nir Eyal. He is the author of two fairly recently published books, Hooked and Indistractable, which we're going to be speaking about both books with him today. Thank you so much for joining us, Nir.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So we're hoping to hear a little bit today about the books themselves, maybe how you came to, to writing these ideas. Maybe we could start with that.
Yeah, so I write books that solve my problems. And so I was looking to understand how products change behavior because I had started two tech companies, the second of which was at the gaming and advertising businesses. And I wanted to start another company. And I knew that habits would be increasingly important. And so when I looked out there and saw, okay, where is the book on how to build habit forming products? I didn't find such a book. So I started researching and writing and blogging about what I was learning in hopes of using these techniques for my own business. And so I talked to people at the kind of companies that are masters of habit formation, the kind of companies we think about who have really made a tremendous impact on all our lives, the tech companies. So these companies that are so good at changing human behavior, I wanted to steal their secrets so that I could use them in my next business. And again, I didn't see these techniques written down anywhere. So I started researching this, and then I was invited to teach a class at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, and then later at the Hasso-Plattner Institute of Design at Stanford. And so that class then became what ultimately resulted in the book. And what I started originally thinking I was going to use for my next company turned out to be my next company. And I really enjoyed the process of writing and researching, and that became my first book. And so that book was really about how can we use technology to build healthy habits, stealing the secrets of Silicon Valley so that we can build good habits in people's lives through the products and services they use by getting them hooked to healthy habits. So that's about building good habits. Now, my second book also came from a personal need. The book Indistractable, I wrote because I found that I was becoming increasingly distracted. So if Hooked is about how to build good habits, Indistractable is how to break those bad habits, specifically these bad habits associated with many of the distractions in our life. So that was both of our books that scratch my own itch.
Well, that's a good explanation. And I love that it came from something that you felt you needed to answer. How important is it to build good habits when you're looking to innovate and create new ideas, new businesses, or anything that we need to sit down and build?
So it's not magic pixie dust that you pour in any business and you're going to have a success. It doesn't. That's not necessarily how it works. It's for certain types of businesses. So businesses that require repeat customer engagement, people using a product because they want to, not because they feel like they have to. Then it's incredibly important. It's an existential threat if the customer doesn't reuse the product. Well, they're going to churn out. They're not going to keep using you. So building a habit is a huge competitive advantage. Now, it's not the only competitive advantage, right? You can have intellectual property, you can have brand, you can have economies of scale. There's all kinds of competitive advantages, but you need to have some kind of competitive advantage, or else you're fighting on price and features all day long with your competitors. Habits are an amazing competitive advantage. If you think about why we use Google, right? When I do in-person workshops and I ask people, how many of you have used Google in the past 24 hours? Almost every hand goes up. But when I say how many of you have used Bing in the past 24 hours, right, the number 2 search engine in the world, maybe 1 or 2 do. Why is that? Is it because the product is better? No, not necessarily. We know that in third-party studies, when we take Google search results versus Bing search results, and we strip out the branding so people don't know which is which, they can't tell the difference. It's a 50-50 preference split. And yet Google owns something like 90% of the search engine market. Why? Because they have a monopoly of the mind. And so what happens is when we look for something online, when we say, we don't ask ourselves, who's the best search engine? We don't do that. We just Google it with little or no conscious thought, purely out of habit. And so that's the strategic advantage of having a habit, is that when you form a customer habit, we don't even give the competition a chance. We don't even ask ourselves where the better product is. We just use it. We Google it with little or no conscious thought, purely out of habit.
How important is attention? Being able to have some control over the distractions when we're thinking about creating something or innovating or any kind of business that we're trying to launch. How important is that? Or even just in our regular lives?
Mhm. So habits themselves are neutral. A habit is just a learned behavior that we can do with what's called automaticity. We can do it with little or no conscious thought. And of course, we have many good habits. So we want the products and services that we make for other people or that we are using ourselves to help us form good habits. So habits to help us eat right, to exercise more, connect with loved ones. Those can be very good, healthy habits facilitated through the products and services and technologies we use. Now, of course, we also have some bad habits, and so that's where that's what I really got into the psychology of when it comes to my second book, Indistractable. And so, to understand distraction, we really have to start with the word distraction, and it's a word that I thought I understood, but I really didn't. And so, I really had to go back to the etymology of the word to realize that if you ask folks what is the opposite of distraction, most people will say the opposite of distraction is focus. Right? I don't want to be distracted. I want to be focused. But that's not exactly right. You see, the opposite of distraction is not focus. The opposite of distraction, if you look at the origin of the word, is traction. Traction and distraction. Both words come from the same Latin root, trahare, which means to pull, and they both end in the same six letters, ACTION, which spells action, reminding us that distraction is not something that happens to us, it is an action we take. So, traction,
Hmm.
by definition, is any action that pulls you towards what you said you were going to do, things that move you closer to your values, closer to your goals, and help you become the kind of person you want to become. The opposite of traction, distraction, pulls you away from what you said you were going to do, away from your goals, away from your values, away from becoming the kind of person you want to become. Those are acts of distraction. Now, what separates traction and distraction is one word, and that one word is intent. As Dorothy Parker said, the time you plan to waste is not wasted time. So I think we need to stop moralizing and medicalizing how people spend their time. You know, you hear people saying, "Oh, video games are melting your brain and don't watch videos on YouTube and stop using social media." Ridiculous. If it's what you want to do with your time and attention, that's fine. But do it according to your values and your schedule, not someone else's. So by planning ahead and saying, "This is what I want to do with my time," great, do it. Don't feel guilty about it. Enjoy that time.
For those who are looking to think about how to build habits, how to um, kind of focus attention and harness attention um, in the marketing and brand building environment, how would you imagine those roles um, being woven in? How do you see that playing how do you see habit and attention playing a role in marketing and brand building?
So the way to build a habit forming product, so that's the subject of my first book, Hooked. That's all about this four-part model that I call the hook model, which is about first figuring out what your trigger is. We talked about internal and external triggers. We have to figure out, for our customers, what is that internal trigger? What is that uncomfortable emotional state that they seek to escape with the use of a product or service? Right? Everything we use, everything we do, in fact, we now know is about escaping discomfort. We used to think that motivation was about carrots and sticks, pain and pleasure. We know neurologically that's not true, that everything we do, every product we use to modulate our mood. So that's very important to understand what is that internal trigger for your customer, for your user. Then we have the action, which is defined as the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. And how can we make that behavior as simple as possible? Then we have the variable reward phase of the hook, which is where we give the user what they came for. We scratch the user's itch, but with some kind of uncertainty, some kind of mystery, some kind of variability. And all kinds of habit forming products, online, offline, you always see this element of uncertainty. And we can talk more about that as well if it's interesting. And then finally, the last step, and probably the most overlooked, is that you have to find a way to get the user to invest in the product to make it better with use. This is what I call stored value. So it used to be that we thought, okay, we'll just give people what they want and that's it. We've done our job. But if we're not asking them to invest, and we're not talking about with money here, we are not talking about with money. We're talking about with data, with content, with reputation, with skill acquisition, anything that makes the product better with use. Because what we find is that products that are not habit forming depreciate. Okay, they lose value with wear and tear. Habit forming products, one of the cardinal traits is that they appreciate. They should get better and better the more we use them. And so that's really what defines a habit forming product, is making sure you can build this hook around the product so that over time, people don't use a product just because of these pings, dings, or rings. They actually start using them
Mm.
because of these internal triggers. So that's a very, very, very short overview of the hook model that I describe in my book, Hooked.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And then, I mean, I guess to close out, I mean, for those people who aren't working in a company environment, for those people who might be working on their own, people who are entrepreneurs, what advice would you offer them in terms of framing their time, building new habits, and focusing their attention?
Sure. So let's go back to the indistractable model that I talked about earlier. Traction, distraction, internal triggers, and external triggers. Now we have the 4 points of our compass that we just work around in order to become indistractable. So step number one is to master internal triggers. We talked about the importance of these uncomfortable emotional states. That is the most important thing because again, 90% of our distractions, 90, come from within, our inability to deal with discomfort. So that's why I say time management requires pain management. Guess what? Money management requires pain management. Weight management requires pain management because all human behavior stems from a desire to escape discomfort. So if you don't master these internal triggers, they will become your master. We have to learn what we will do when we experience loneliness, uncertainty, stress, anxiety. Do we escape it with distraction by turning on the TV or checking email at work or booking another pointless meeting, whatever the distraction might be? Or do we harness that discomfort as rocket fuel to propel us towards traction? So that's step number one, master the internal triggers. And I give you a dozen different techniques that you can use right away so that you have these tools in your toolkit. Whenever you feel these internal triggers, you know what to do with them so that you can use that discomfort in a healthy way rather than a hurtful way. The second step is to make time for traction. The fact is, if you don't know what you plan to do with your time, you can't say you got distracted, right? You can't say you got distracted if you don't know what you got distracted from. So unless you're retired or a child, you have to plan your day. This is called time boxing, and it uses a psychological technique called planning the implementation intention, just a fancy way of deciding, of saying that you decide what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. Absolutely critical technique, and I teach you exactly step by step how to do that based on turning your values into time. Okay, it's been studied in thousands of peer-reviewed studies. Very, very impactful technique. And we see high performers in every industry already do this. Many people don't do it because it takes a little bit of work. But once you get into the flow of it, something that takes me 10 minutes a week, and I can't live without it. It's become a crucial part of my life. Again, I wrote the book for me, and now it's really helped me become indistractable. Step number three is to hack back those external triggers. So this is where we talk about the pings, dings, and rings. Even though it's 10% of the reason we get distracted, a lot of things we can do. We're not powerless against technology. We can hack back technology to serve us as opposed to us serving it. And then finally, the last step is to prevent distraction with pacts. And so we use what's called a pre-commitment device. We make a promise to ourselves or to others to make sure that we have this firewall against distraction so that if all else fails, we have this last line of defense. So it's really those 4 steps to becoming indistractable. Master the internal triggers, make time for traction, hack back external triggers, and prevent distraction with pacts. And again, that's a very, very short overview of a much longer process that I describe in Indistractable.
Well, I appreciate all of that because I actually did take, I love the hack back piece of it. And I was starting to apply some of that into my own day. This is can be a crazy time of year, so it can be very helpful. So thank you again for joining us. Nir Eyal, author of Hooked. I almost said the wrong word. Hooked and Indistractable. Thank you so much again for joining us to our Signal 360 Spotlight.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.